After Claire broke up with Leo back then, she cried her heart out. It was my company and comfort that saved her from the thoughts of committing suicide many times, and then we got married. However, the happy life after marriage was soon shattered by Leo, who returned to the country. When I saw the two of them going in and out of the hotel together, I couldn't suppress the anger in my heart. I drove my car and ran them over crazily and then ended my own life. Later, I was reincarnated and went back to the day when I ran them over. In this life, I'm ready to help them be together. It seemed that I had a long dream, in which there were scenes full of blood like a sea and broken images. Claire and Leo's bodies were torn apart, and I also spat blood all over myself when I died because of extreme anger. These were the scenes of my previous life. When I saw my beloved wife with her first love, I went crazy and killed them, and then died of anger on the spot. But now I woke up, and in front of me was Claire, who had just finished dressing up. So you wake up at this time every day at home? Claire noticed my movement and looked at me with a bit of disgust in her eyes. The movement of her body made the fragrance of her perfume waft towards me. She had a lot of perfumes, but today she happened to spray the one that Leo liked the most in the past. I'm going out to discuss work. I'm not sure when I'll be back. This conversation seemed familiar. I picked up my phone and took a look. Today was her birthday. I was reincarnated and went back to the day when the three of us died together. In my previous life, I believed her words and waited foolishly at home for her to finish work and come back. I also carefully prepared gifts and a table of candlelight dinner, thinking of giving her a surprise. But the dishes were heated again and again, and I didn't see Claire until late at night. Worried that something had happened to her, I searched half of the city. Finally, in Leo's WeChat moments, I recognized Claire's clothes on the chair at a glance. At that moment, my heart was instantly stabbed with pain, and a chill ran through my body. I rushed madly to the restaurant where Leo had checked in and saw the two of them chatting happily. Standing outside the French window and looking at them like a young couple in love, I was completely enraged. After rushing into the restaurant, I vented my anger on Leo and got into a fight with him. It was me that Claire pushed away, and it was Leo that she protected. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at me coldly and said, "It seems you've misunderstood. Perhaps I should reintroduce myself." Then he handed me his business card and the contract on the table. Leo was now the person in charge of the Greater China region of a foreign-funded enterprise with strong financial resources, and he was here to have business negotiations with Claire. Claire scolded me for making a fuss and forced me to apologize to Leo. I apologized and then left. On the way, when they were chatting and laughing on their way to the hotel, I drove my car towards them and then ran them over repeatedly. The past scenes flashed by again, but my heart didn't hurt as much as it did in my previous life. Excited about finding that I was reincarnated and having overcome the past anger, I jumped out of bed. My excited look made me seem like a child making unreasonable demands. "Jason, what's wrong with you? I've said that I still have very important work to do. If you're really that idle, you might as well go and take care of your own company." After saying this, Claire was about to leave in a hurry. She was in a rush to meet Leo. Looking at her graceful figure, the corners of my mouth curled up slightly, and I smiled and replied, "Okay. Indeed, I should go and take care of the enterprise of Jason's family. In my previous life, I devoted all my efforts to Claire. I went to great lengths to expand the business and make investments for Claire's family group. To give her confidence and make her feel that her efforts had rewards, I never mentioned it to her. But in Claire's eyes, I was idle all day long and achieved nothing. After being reincarnated this time, I should focus on my own career." Looking at the smile that I couldn't hide at the corners of my mouth, Claire said in a cold tone again, "You're really as thick-skinned as a dead pig." She looked at me a bit puzzled and then turned around to leave with her handbag. After just a few steps, she added again, "If you're hungry, ask Sister Maggie to cook. Don't act like a child at your age." "Claire." I called out to stop her. She turned around a bit unexpectedly. Since we got married, I seldom called her by her full name. "What, did I hurt your self-esteem?" Her tone was still indifferent. I used to think that the woman in front of me would be the love of my life, and we would share the snow and grow old together. But now she can no longer stir up the slightest ripple in my heart. Let's get divorced. Apparently, Claire didn't expect that I would say this. She stared at me blankly for a long time. Then she frowned and her expression became impatient again. Jason, is it interesting for you to say this? If it weren't for you being so useless, would I have to run around for work every day? Was it really for work or for her former first love? Since Leo returned to the country, the two of them had been getting along more and more frequently, almost spending every day together. But every time I mentioned it, Claire would use the excuse of work needs to put me off. Later, even on our anniversary, Leo could call Claire away with just one phone call. The reason left for me was still work needs. Listen to me. Before I could finish my words, she had already walked quickly towards the door. As the sound of the door closing fell, the room became quiet. I looked at the sunset outside the window and felt a sense of relief like never before. I already knew what would happen later. Now I just wanted to get divorced from Claire smoothly. However, Claire would never believe that I really wanted a divorce at this time. She just thought that I was being unreasonable and wanted to use such a willful way to make her spend more time with me. Because at that time, I regarded Claire as a precious treasure and couldn't wait to give her my heart. No one would believe that I really wanted to separate from her. Looking back now, I was really ridiculously stupid back then. Jason's family and Claire's family were old family friends, and their parents could be called sworn comrades. They even jointly founded a company and gave it to us after I and Claire got married. Claire was 2 years older than me and had taken good care of me like an elder sister since childhood. During high school, we went to different schools and hardly kept in touch with each other. It wasn't until I was admitted to the same university as her that I heard about Leo, whom she had known in high school. The two of them were deeply in love. Later, due to frequent quarrels and Leo's insistence on going abroad, they broke up. After that, Claire seemed like a different person. She neglected her studies, drank alcohol all day long, and even thought about committing suicide. She was no longer the gentle and graceful elder sister I had known since childhood. Claire's parents came to me and asked me to help take care of her more. Actually, even without them asking, I would have done it anyway. After all, I had had a crush on Claire since I was a child. Her temper became irritable, and people around her gradually kept their distance from her. Only I shamelessly stayed by her side. Besides accompanying her to drink and relieve her mood, I also begged the instructors and classmates to help her with her makeup lessons. Otherwise, I was worried that she wouldn't be able to graduate. They didn't originally want to bother with Claire, but they couldn't resist my persistent persuasion with good food and drinks every day and were finally touched by my sincerity. On the other hand, I also had to comfort Claire and make sure that she at least wouldn't fail any exams each time. Otherwise, I wouldn't accompany her to drink or go bungee jumping, and I would tell Claire's parents about these things. Finally, when she graduated, I successfully helped her get out of the past gloom. And with the help of our parents, our marriage was put on the agenda. After graduation, Claire joined Claire's family group and began to concentrate on her career. Although I was still studying, I was also getting familiar with the company's business and using family resources to help Claire's company develop. We would take time out from our busy schedules to have meals and watch plays together, and we had quite a lot of wonderful memories. I thought that the old Claire had come back, and we would always be happy like this. However, after Leo returned to the country, Claire started to change. Claire went out early and came back late. Many times, there was a strong smell of tobacco on her body. She never smoked, but I heard that Leo was a heavy smoker. Claire had quarreled with him many times because of his heavy smoking habit in the past, but now it seemed that she didn't care about it anymore. Even once, when Claire came home exhausted, I saw a red mark on her neck. I asked her furiously if it was Leo's hickey. She looked at me coldly and explained that she wasn't feeling well and that it was a method Leo told her about. Pinching her own neck. What a lame excuse. What effect could pinching one's own neck have except for causing pain? But Claire didn't intend to continue explaining and just left a sentence, "I've already explained it. Believe it or not, it's up to you." We no longer had the sweetness we used to have, and the time we met became less and less. Even when we met, we were either quarreling or in a cold war. I couldn't figure it out. If you really couldn't let him go, why did you choose to accept me? Since you chose me, why did you push me away in such a cruel way? I remembered that day when she told me personally that she had just realized that the person she liked was me. She wanted to marry me and spend the rest of her happy life with me. But later, in her eyes, I became a useless burden, an ignorant child who always needed her to take care of. It was just that after every quarrel, I was always the one who bowed my head and admitted my mistake. I couldn't bear to leave her. I tried my best to keep her by my side. However, compared to Leo, he could easily take Claire away from me with just a few words or a phone call. In this way, what was I after all? Long-term sensitivity and suspicion. Endless quarrels over a man made me so angry that I had a sudden death on the spot when I saw Leo hugging Claire with my own eyes. It was really ridiculous to humiliate myself like this for a woman who didn't love me. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself, and a joyful smile appeared at the corners of my mouth after being reincarnated. Now I still didn't have the weather-beaten face tortured by emotions and was still the man with firm eyes. Since God gave me a chance to start over, in this life, I should also live for myself. Jason, the young master of the Jason family and a business genius, was back. Since I was reincarnated, I shouldn't focus my mind on a woman who betrayed me anymore. I left home and drove to the Jason family. When I was in high school, I began to get familiar with the company's business and often participated in decision-making and proposal-making. Many of my proposals had brought huge benefits to the company. After going to university, I officially began to take over the company. However, later, I focused all my attention on Claire, accompanied her to get out of the pain of being dumped, and went to great lengths to attract cooperation for her company. She never knew what I had done, and I never mentioned it either. Just because I wanted her to feel that her efforts had paid off. Because of this, in her eyes, I was an idle person who needed her to work hard outside to earn money. Perhaps a man like Leo who had a successful career could touch her heart more. Although I hadn't been back for a long time, all the employees still remembered me and greeted me one after another. In the spacious president's office, I was looking through the recent affairs of the company. The secretary stood beside me respectfully. It then occurred to me that she used to be my junior at school. The girl who had followed me from high school until now had always been unknown, so she seldom caught my attention. General Manager Jason, during the period when you were away from the company, the projects that were being followed up according to your previous instructions are all progressing in an orderly manner. Some of them have been successfully completed, and now the company has a large cash flow. Secretary Wendy's tone was rather proud. Indeed, her contribution to this was not small. I nodded with satisfaction. The company's financial statements looked great. Although I didn't often deal with the affairs of my own company, I had already set the general direction long ago. Except for some major decisions, I handed everything else over to others to manage. Now it seemed that they really didn't let me down. I looked at Wendy. "Are you free tonight?" Wendy was stunned for a moment and said nervously, "Yes." "May I ask which plan General Manager Jason needs to improve?" I was a bit surprised. I didn't expect this junior to be such a workaholic. I sneered and waved my hand. "The plans are fine. I just wanted to ask if you'd like to have dinner together." Wendy immediately showed an excited look in her eyes but still hesitated and said, "Your wife might be unhappy if she knew about it." Unhappy? I thought she must be extremely happy tonight. Because her beloved first love finally came back, and he deliberately chose her birthday to come back. I thought this must be the biggest surprise for her. "We're getting divorced." After saying that, I paused for a moment and continued. "But it doesn't matter anyway. She won't care. We just had a meal together." Finally, I spread my hands and said with a bit of self-mockery, "After all, it was just for work needs." Wendy didn't understand what I meant, but I saw a flash of disappointment in her eyes. In a restaurant near the company, Wendy and I sat facing each other, just like when we ate in the cafeteria during our school days. After all these years, Wendy was still reserved. Or rather, she was like this in front of me because I had seen how decisive and efficient she was at work. Relax. After work hours, we're just friends, I said casually and handed the menu in my hand to her. Wendy nodded and gracefully ordered a few dishes. As a business elite with outstanding professional abilities, she could exude the aura of a strong woman in any occasion. During the days when I was away from the company, she took care of many things on my behalf as my secretary. General Manager Jason, what's this about? I knew what she was wondering about, why I suddenly came back to the company officially and also invited her to have dinner together. Of course, it wasn't just for catching up on old times. It was because I remembered that during this period in my previous life, Wendy had put forward a proposal that could make a lot of money. But at that time, I was so trapped by love that I missed a huge income. If you're not used to it, you can think of it as for work needs, I said casually and didn't rush to reveal her thoughts. After hearing my words, hope flickered in Wendy's eyes, but she still said cautiously, General Manager Jason, I have a bold proposal regarding work. I wonder if I can tell you about it. Go ahead. Without any more nonsense, I knew her idea must be profitable. Since she was a child, Wendy had always had a lot of whimsical ideas in her head. Although they sounded a bit strange, they could always achieve unexpected success. She suggested that I bid for an undeveloped piece of land. The profits would surely multiply several times after a few months, and new industrial chains could be laid out around the place, which could bring continuous profits for at least 10 years. I could see this point, but to actually implement it smoothly, Wendy had to take charge in person. No one else could do it. General Manager Jason, if you agree to this project, I'd like to assist in it. No, you'll take the lead in the whole process of this matter. It's also a good opportunity to improve your abilities. I waved my hand and interrupted Wendy's proposal. Apparently, she didn't expect that I would trust her so much and hand it over to her like this. She was just stunned for a few seconds and then regained her confident look. General Manager Jason, don't worry. I'll go all out. Of course, I knew that she had always been reliable in doing things. Back in high school, for the victory of a competition, she devoted herself to it day and night. Finally, she won the first place. After getting the prize, she immediately came to show off to me. She did all these things just because of a casual joke I made. During high school, we had many meals together. Just like today. She always liked to ask me for advice on studies and pestered me to teach her business knowledge. I still remembered that she looked at me naively and said, Senior, one day I'll also become as excellent as you. I looked at Wendy and smiled faintly. She had already achieved it now. General Manager Jason, have I been rude? Wendy quickly took a tissue to wipe her mouth and looked at me nervously. Wendy, since when did you become so reserved in front of me? Wendy was 1 grade lower than me. She wasn't by my side for a year before she was admitted to the same university as me. Hearing my question, she slightly lowered her head and murmured softly, after going to university, I heard that you accompanied a heartbroken girl every day and you seemed like a different person. I was a bit surprised. Yes, because of Claire back then, I had also become a bit unlike myself. No wonder Wendy left such a faint impression on me in university. Besides the fact that I had focused all my attention on Claire, it seemed that she also deliberately avoided me. Today is her birthday. Aren't you going to accompany her, General Manager Jason? She has someone to accompany her. Wendy didn't say anything more, and I simply chose to remain silent. We just looked at each other without saying a word. When I got home, Claire was sitting on the sofa with a gloomy face. Hearing the sound of me closing the door, she said with a bit of dissatisfaction in her tone, You still know to come back. I thought you wouldn't come home tonight. Although I wasn't jealous, it seemed that I could smell a hint of jealousy in the air. I went back to take care of the company. Remember to put the divorce on the agenda. Get it done as soon as possible after you finish this busy period. After saying that, I was about to walk towards the bedroom, planning to take my things and move to the next room to sleep. After all, it wasn't appropriate for us to share the same room now. However, Claire suddenly stood up from the sofa. The smell of red wine on her body wafted towards me. She reached out and grabbed my tie. Her warm breath blew on my face. "You're so eager to get divorced. Is it because of that little secretary in the company?" I frowned and didn't say a word, but she seemed to have caught me by the handle and sneered. "I knew there was something between you two. You really disappoint me." I didn't expect Claire to play the blame game first. I shook off her hand and said calmly, "I don't know where you got the news from, but we just had a simple meal together. And you should be very happy to have Leo accompany you on your birthday, right?" Claire was slightly stunned and then stared at me with wide eyes. "Did you follow me? Leo has already posted several updates on his WeChat moments. Do I still need to follow you? And how did you know that I had dinner with my secretary?" I looked at Claire and smiled faintly, not showing much concern on my face. Because in my heart, whether she went to see Leo or the fact that I had dinner with Wendy was discovered didn't matter. We were definitely going to get divorced. You admit it so directly. You deliberately had a meal with that young and beautiful secretary just to annoy me. Is it interesting? Claire knew Wendy because Wendy often showed up when I was in most need of help. However, she had never been jealous about it before. It was a bit strange today. I shook my head and walked towards the bedroom. "I didn't mean to annoy you. It was just like what you said, for work needs. I'll move to the guest room to sleep first. You should hurry up with the divorce." Before I could open the door of the bedroom, Claire had already thrown a pillow at my back. She said to me coldly, "Jason, divorce isn't something that can be talked about casually." I turned around, looked at her and nodded. "I know. I'm very serious now." Claire sneered. "Okay, that's what you said. Don't come begging me for forgiveness when you regret it later. If you could be half as mature as Leo, I would have a much easier life." Claire often compared me with Leo. In her eyes, I couldn't compare with him in anything. She had also long been used to the fact that whenever we had a quarrel, I couldn't bear it and would always be the first to bow my head and admit my mistake. And then it was as if nothing had happened. There's always a line in romantic dramas, "Aren't you just taking advantage of the fact that I love you and hurting me so recklessly?" The ones we can't have are always disturbing in our hearts, while those who are favored are fearless. She was attached to her first love, and I was deeply in love with her. However, now my heart has completely detached from her. Although I moved to the slightly smaller room next door, I slept extremely comfortably. Early the next morning, when I got up to make breakfast, Claire didn't even look at me and walked straight out of the door. Usually, I would stay at home and prepare different kinds of breakfasts and dinners for her every day. But now I didn't need to make hers anymore. After all, she would be staying with Leo recently. I also had to be busy building my own business empire. I didn't go to the Jason family but went to the Huaxia investment group jointly founded by Claire's family and the Jason family. According to the shareholding distribution, Claire had the greatest say in this company. After all, Claire was a workaholic. I was willing to play a supporting role beside her and be her backup behind the scenes. So when the elders of the two families gave us this company, Claire became the largest shareholder. I originally came here to get some materials. Unexpectedly, I ran into Leo. He was wearing a custom-made and expensive suit and looked like a business elite. After seeing me, he was slightly stunned for a moment, and then waved to me. "General Manager Jason, long time no see. Would you like a cup of tea?" In recent years, I had been too low-key and seldom appeared in the business field, so his tone inevitably carried a bit of superiority. There was a huge tea table in my office, which was specially used to entertain guests. I really didn't expect that I would be having tea with my wife's first love in my own office. General Manager Jason's tea is good. When we were young, we didn't know how to drink tea yet. Later, Claire took me to start tasting tea. This is also the first tea I ever drank. I didn't expect that she's still drinking it now. I gently put down the teacup and played with it on the table. I smiled lightly and said, "What a coincidence. This tea is unique to my family's tea plantation. Claire and I have been drinking it since we were children. I just didn't expect that General Manager Leo got in touch with tea culture so late. No wonder you chose to study abroad. You should prefer coffee, right?" Leo was stunned for a moment and immediately looked embarrassed. After gulping down the tea in the cup, he couldn't help coughing twice and then looked at me again. "Jason, do you know that yesterday was Claire's birthday?" Leo looked at me with a half smile and a hint of cunning flashed in his eyes. "What are you trying to say?" "Nothing. I just want to ask you if you could stop holding Claire back." I picked up the teacup, blew on it, and asked, "What do you mean? Are you pretending to be stupid? She doesn't love you anymore. Is it interesting to deceive yourself?" Leo leaned back on the chair and looked at me provocatively. General Manager Leo is really meddling too much. But I think you're being a bit too self-absorbed. I stood up, just about to ask him to leave. After all, there was no need to continue the conversation. I still had a lot of things to do. Leo also stood up and stood opposite me, looking me straight in the eye. I didn't expect that Claire would become like this during the years I was away. How interesting she was when she was with me before. Look at how tired she is now because of you. Leo's tone became more and more excited and he gradually showed a smile. However, since I came back, she's become a lot more cheerful. She said that only when I'm around can she be truly happy. We seem to have gone back to the good old days. I sneered in my heart. If you two were really that good, why did you break up in the first place? If you really cared about her, she wouldn't have let herself go downhill during her college years. If there's nothing else, please leave. I made a gesture of seeing a guest off towards the door. Unexpectedly, the door was pulled open, and I saw Claire walking in with an angry look on her face. "Jason, what are you doing? Are you trying to interrogate us?" Claire stood beside Leo, creating an opposing situation with me. I stared at Claire for a long time, thought for a moment, and said, "Please make it clear that this is my office." He came to me on his own initiative. After saying that, I regretted it a bit. Since I had already decided to get divorced, why did I explain so much to her? "Both of you, please leave." I raised my hand again, this time asking the two of them to leave. "Jason, can't you be a bit more mature? Is it interesting to always make a fuss?" Until now, Claire still thought that I was making a fuss, but I really didn't want to have any more contact with them. "I'm not making a fuss." I looked at Claire. "Let's get divorced quickly. I wish you two happiness." After saying that, I sat back in the chair and started drinking tea on my own. I saw Claire's fair cheeks turn red in an instant, and her eyes were fixed tightly on me. "Jason, do you have to make such a fuss?" Seeing that I remained unmoved, her tone became even colder. "Okay, we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get divorced tomorrow." After the two of them left, only the sound of me drinking tea remained in the office. If things had developed as they did in my previous life, Claire and I wouldn't have divorced later. I just had to endure her intimacy with her first love. Leo's arrival today actually gave me a push. However, after so many years of relationship, now that it had come to the point of divorce, I couldn't help feeling a bit sentimental in my heart. After finishing the cup of tea in front of me, I took the materials and left the company. The next day, Claire and I got divorced at the Civil Affairs Bureau. When signing, Claire turned her head to look at me. Her lips moved slightly as if she wanted to say something but held back. "What's the matter? Don't you regret it?" I looked at this girl who had grown up with me. I had accompanied her wholeheartedly for several years to pull her out of the shadow after the breakup. But when her first love came back, she immediately threw herself into his arms. Thinking of this, I nodded firmly. Claire's hand holding the pen trembled a little and finally she signed her name. After signing and putting our fingerprints on the papers, we were no longer husband and wife. However, we each ran a company in the first place. As for the Huaxia Investment Group, I was only responsible for dividends. So there were no disputes over the distribution of assets. After walking out of the gate, Leo was already standing beside the car door waiting for Claire. On the other side, Wendy, as my secretary and driver, also opened the car door and waited for me. I had a faint glance at Claire, and neither of us said a word and walked towards different cars. The two cars drove in opposite directions, as if heading towards different paths of life. In a year's time, the share price of the Jason family soared, and its market value multiplied several times. I, who began to stand out in the business world, completely got rid of the label of relying on a wealthy family president. I became the recognized youngest and outstanding entrepreneur in this city. In the office, Wendy, wearing a business suit, put the documents and coffee on my desk with a sweet smile. The project that Wendy was in charge of a year ago was progressing smoothly, and it seemed that it would soon start to generate huge profits. The company's financial statements were also looking better and better. However, there was one document that made me frown. Claire's Family Group hadn't maintained the trend of rapid development in this year. Instead, it began to decline. Judging from the business evaluation, the company had been in a loss state in the past year. Many of the original business transactions were interrupted, and even some investment consortia started to withdraw. If it weren't for the connections and reputation of old Mr. Victor holding it up, the Claire Family Group might have been on the verge of collapse. After a brief thought, I quickly understood. Claire had a strong ambition for business, but unfortunately, her ability wasn't outstanding. The reason why the Claire family could rise under her leadership was mostly because of me. Since the divorce, I had devoted myself wholeheartedly to the Jason family and naturally stopped caring about the Claire family. The elders of the two families had worked hard for most of their lives and now retired behind the scenes and started traveling around the world to relax. Now the crisis of the Claire family could only be shouldered by Claire herself. However, she still had Leo by her side, and maybe they could get through the difficulties. For me, this matter wasn't worth bothering about. General Manager Jason, will you attend the wine party tonight? Wendy asked me softly beside me. This project had caused a great sensation in the circle, and this wine party was held to promote cooperation, attract investments, and so on. Wendy, the project leader, was the protagonist tonight, and I didn't necessarily have to participate. I nodded and said, "Okay, go and get ready." Wendy was my junior at school and had always followed in my footsteps. I should support her. Seeing that I agreed, Wendy couldn't hide her joy. She nodded and turned around and left quickly. I watched Wendy's back until it disappeared and couldn't help sighing. After getting along with her during this period of time, I realized that I seemed to have overlooked something before. Wendy was just like me, who accompanied Claire back then. The only difference was that her company never bothered me and she made contributions silently. Fate is so wonderful that people are always wandering between missing and meeting. All we can do seems to be to let nature take its course. At night, Wendy and I took separate cars to the wine party venue. The guests who were invited were all the powerful and wealthy people in the upper circles of the city or neighboring cities. Wendy was wearing a long black dress. Her dignified and elegant dress made her look very eye-catching and gave her an air of a female president. As the protagonist of tonight, Wendy had to give a speech on the stage after arriving. She looked at me, and I gave her an encouraging look. Watching her gracefully walk onto the stage, I actually felt a sense of pride. Wendy was grateful for my efforts, while Claire always took them for granted. After the applause died down, a familiar voice came from beside me. "Jason, long time no see." "Claire." I turned my head and looked at her in surprise. I didn't expect that Claire, who was already in a difficult situation and had her hands full, would still appear here. Did she want to turn things around through this project? Her tone became a bit softer. "Dad used to always praise you as a natural talent for business. I didn't believe it back then. Now it seems that you really are a person who makes a great splash once you take action. Although we're divorced, our friendship as childhood sweethearts still exists. Just tell me directly if you have something to say." Claire was stunned for a moment. Obviously, she had something to ask for. Although I was determined to divorce her, after all, the relationship between our two families was there. If she was in trouble, I should help her out for both emotional and reasonable reasons. However, after hesitating for a moment, she said something unexpected. Believe it or not, Leo and I have nothing to do with each other. It's always been just a working relationship. I took a look at Claire and didn't answer her question. In this past year, Claire would occasionally want to contact me, but I never paid attention. On the contrary, I often saw traces of Claire in Leo's WeChat moments. It could be seen that they often stayed together and got along very pleasant. Even Leo sent me a photo of Claire leaning against the car window with a drunken look in the car and asked me hypocritically if I wanted to pick her up and take her home. After I replied that we were already divorced, he was even magnanimous enough to say that he would help take good care of her. This was pretty much the same as my memory in my previous life. The difference was that I couldn't bear to leave in the past, but now I divorced her resolutely. As for the working relationship, what kind of work required them to be together day and night for as long as a year? Leo was just the person in charge of the Greater China region of a foreign-funded enterprise with some strength. How much benefit could he bring to the Claire family group that required a president to negotiate cooperation for a whole year? Seeing that I didn't say anything, Claire shook her head sadly. After a while, with tears in her eyes, she looked at me and said, "Jason, could you give me one more chance?" Before I could say anything, there was thunderous applause at the scene, and my name was called on the stage, inviting me to give a speech. "It's impossible for us." Leaving a hasty sentence, I tidied up my clothes and expression and went on the stage to give a speech as Wendy's backup. "Jason, please?" Her faint voice reached my ears and was then drowned out by the thunderous applause. At night, I received a call from Wendy saying that she had just seen Leo taking Claire into a hotel. I didn't want to pay attention at first, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw the time on the computer. Wasn't this the day when I died of a sudden fit of anger in my previous life? Subconsciously, I grabbed my car keys and drove to the hotel. Wendy mentioned that it wasn't far away and it took only 10 minutes to get there by car. I happened to see Claire lying in Leo's arms. In my previous life, it was this scene that made me so angry that I died on the spot. But now, I was extremely sober. Leo showed a flustered look when he saw me and then pretended to be nonchalant and continued walking inside. I sensed that something was wrong, so I stepped forward and stopped him. "General Manager Jason, what are you doing?" Leo looked down at Claire, who was unconscious from drunkenness in his arms, and forced himself to look calm as he looked at me. "Just checking on my ex-wife." Claire wasn't a lightweight drinker. Even during the period when she was heartbroken and let herself go, she wouldn't get so drunk that she lost consciousness outside. She told me that no matter how sad she was, she couldn't let herself get into a situation that she couldn't control. No matter in front of whom. If the two of them really had a relationship, they should have gone home. Why would they come to a hotel, Jason? As you said, she's your ex-wife. Aren't you being a bit too nosy? I shook my head and stared into Leo's eyes. "General Manager Leo, you had a wild time during the years you were abroad. You lived a life of luxury, surrounded by women every day." "What?" Leo took half a step back subconsciously, with a flustered look in his eyes. "The scale and assets of your company are just a little bit larger than those of Claire's family. It's not a situation where you need to curry favor. So what? So, I'll venture a guess. What you're after this time isn't Claire, but Claire's family, right?" Leo's face kept changing after hearing this, but he quickly calmed down. "You can't prove it. I can sue you for slander." I had expected that Leo would try his best to deny it, and I didn't bother to argue with him. "I think you've forgotten one thing. Old Mr. Victor has just retired behind the scenes. He hasn't completely ignored the company. Do you understand what I mean?" Over the past year, the elders of both families had seen the development of the Claire family group and the Jason family, including some of the things Leo had done to the company. It's just that they didn't plan to interfere too much, so they asked me to help with the investigation. The Claire family group had developed rapidly in recent years and was recognized as having great prospects in the industry. So Leo had his eye on this lucrative target. After coming back, he planned to drive a wedge between us and then stay by Claire's side smoothly. Apparently, Claire quickly fell into the trap of her first love. Although I later found out the truth, I still didn't regret the decision to divorce. Because once love has shifted, it's no longer worth lingering on. Soon, a group of people in suits surrounded us, and I took Claire from Leo's arms. After all, we were childhood sweethearts, and Claire's parents treated me like their own son. I couldn't just ignore it. Kid, I underestimated you. Leo looked at me with eyes full of unwillingness and anger. All his efforts for so long had come to nothing. I think his unwillingness was not just because I stopped his good deed tonight. At the villa of Claire's family, Claire's parents invited our family to have dinner. In the past, we often had such family dinners, but later the elders all went on a round-the-world trip, so there were fewer of them. After dinner, Claire invited me to take a walk in the garden. Thank you. Otherwise, I might. Over the past year, I found that Claire seemed to have changed a lot. She wasn't as cold and tired of me as she was in my previous life. It was nothing, I said casually. Claire told me that she had indeed been shaken when Leo came back. But their interactions had always been based on work. She wanted a project in Leo's hands, which she thought had great development prospects. She was also slow to realize Leo's ambition until the day he wanted to get back together and offered to help the Claire family. It's just that he used some hard-to-detect tricks in the contract. Fortunately, she showed it to old Mr. Victor just to be on the safe side and then discovered the loopholes. On that day, Leo was also furious and used some means to get Claire drunk, planning to force the issue, but I stopped him in time. Jason, after the divorce, I realized that the rapid development of the Claire family couldn't have happened without your help. I always thought it was because of my own efforts and disliked your idleness. I forgot that Mom and Dad used to praise your abilities. I'm really ridiculous. Claire shook her head with a bitter smile. I then realized that over the past year, although she was still beautiful, she couldn't hide the haggard look in her eyes. I'm sorry. Claire stood there, lowering her head and apologizing to me. At that moment, I seemed to see the gentle and kind neighbor sister from my childhood. It's all in the past. I turned my face to look at the flower bed swayed by the breeze. Everything had gone with the wind. I don't want it to be in the past. We shouldn't be like this. Claire stared at me tightly, with some unwillingness in her eyes. Maybe we were both wrong, or maybe it's fate playing tricks. Anyway, everything should come to an end. I walked past Claire and walked outside. When I left, I only left a relieved smile. In my previous life, I was kept in the dark. There were a year's worth of suspicions, quarrels, and uneasiness, and finally, I died of anger on the spot. Even so, I still couldn't accept being treated like that. I didn't care about Leo's attitude. What I cared about was Claire's attitude when Leo deliberately approached her. Apparently, she was shaken. And it was only after being reincarnated that I found that there was someone more worthy waiting for me. Outside the gate of Claire's family villa, a car was already waiting, and a familiar figure standing beside the car was waving at me. Reincarnation means a new life. During the summer vacation trip, my boyfriend said he had found a natural camping paradise.